Swayam Brahma Varunendra Rudramarudastunandi Divyaistavaihi Vede Sangapadakramopanisadaihi Gayantiyam Samagaha Dhyanavastida Tadgatena Manasa Pasyandiyam Yogino Yasyandam Navidusura Suraganaha Devaya Tasmai Namaha. Om Sruti Smriti Purananam Alayam Karunalayam Namami Bhagavad Padam Shankaram Loka Shankaram. We are continuing the discussion on the Bhashyam, the commentary on the 21st verse of the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita. In the last session we discussed a possible objection from some scholars who may have understood the literal meaning of some of the scriptures without actually understanding the true implication. So Bhashyakara says, Tatra kejit pandidam manyaha vadanti janmadi shat bhava vikriyarahitaha avikriya akarta eka aham atma idi na kasijit jnanam upadyate. So there could be some misguided philosophers who are not truly philosophers, not fully understood the meaning of the scriptures that they claim to have studied, but may have just got some literal meaning. They may tell us, they may assert that this sort of Advaita Jnanam is just a doctrine, it is just a dogma or just an idea or a concept. It never really happens to anyone as an experience, as an inner experience. Now we must remember that Advaita essentially focuses on experience. Shankaracharya has repeatedly asserted this again and again, Srutya, Yuktya, Swanubhutya. You read the scriptures, you listen to the scriptures, then you do Maranam, you do Nididhyasanam, you try to logically analyze the meaning of the scriptural statements, and then finally you experience the essence of the teachings. It becomes a matter of your own experience. It is not just a teaching of a church or an institution. It is not a doctrine or a dogma. Rather, it is an inner experience. We realize the reality of the divine being present in us as an immanent divine reality. So this is the ultimate goal of human existence. Those who are not yet reached this level of spiritual evolution, to straight away reach this experience, they can certainly begin from where they stand right now. And they can read the scriptures, they can meditate on the meaning of the scriptural statements, and they can, through contemplation, understanding the true implications of the scriptural statements, and finally, through the practice of karma yoga, they can attain chitta suddhi, mental purity, and once they attain chitta suddhi, they become spiritually fit for jnana prapti and liberation. This is open to everyone. So the Advaita Anubhuti, the spiritual experience of non-dualism, the Shankaracharya is teaching about, is a universal spiritual idea. Not a universal spiritual experience which can happen to anyone, no matter what religion you are born into, no matter what tradition you are born into. If you lead a pure life, practice unselfishness, practice discerning wisdom, understanding the real and the unreal, and practice renunciation, true renunciation for pleasures in this world and pleasures in afterlife, and self-control, self-restraint, then you become a true aspirant for liberation. It's called mumukshutvam, and then it is possible for anyone in this world. So it's a very universal spiritual paradigm, spiritual doctrine that Shankaracharya is talking about. But though it's a doctrine as expounded in a philosophical work, it is essentially a matter of inner experience. Shankaracharya himself says, all books, all doctrines, all theologies are only meant to prepare us to go beyond them, so that we transcend philosophy. We reach the level of inner experience when we realize that the whole existence is one spiritual family. So, Bhashyakara has explained, and as a matter of fact, when a person reaches that level of spiritual aspiration, then he won't feel any need for any kind of rituals, any kind of practices, any external ceremonies, just for attaining some material, empirical enjoyment. So Bhashyakara says, no, the assertion of the so-called philosophers, so-called scholars, Pandidam Manyamana, is totally wrong. Bhashyakara says, न जायते इत्यादि शास्त्रोपदेश अनर्थक्यात्. Now, if their ideas are taken seriously, then you have to say that the scriptural statements such as न जायते म्रियते वा कदाचित् नायं भूत्वा भविता वा न भूयः अजो नित्य शाश्वतोऽयं पुराणो न हन्यते हन्यमाने शरीरे, all these great statements will become totally irrelevant. So, if you accept the views of these so-called false thinkers, philosophers who are philosophers only in their view, who are not really understood the true meaning of spiritual philosophy, if you take them seriously, then you will have to admit the fact, admit the idea that these great statements, indeed, that's given in the 20th verse of the Gita, 2nd chapter, na jayate mriyadeva kadachit, etc. Those ideas will become totally irrelevant, totally nonsensical. So that even you may not be willing to admit. Because even Mimamsakas cannot completely assert that these great scriptural statements are totally without any meaning. So even they won't be willing to go that far. Now here Mimamsakas are giving some of these ideas, Yatha cha shastropadesha samarthya dharma sthita vijnanam kartu cha dekantara sambandhi jnanam cha upadyate तथा शास्त्रात् तस्य एव आत्मनः अविक्रिया अकर्तृत्व एकत्वादि विज्ञानं कस्मात् न उत्पद्यते इति प्रष्टव्यः. So Bhashyakara is again asking a question, or rather he is asserting his view, addressing the Purvamimamsakas, addressing the philosophers of ritualism, that is the philosophy of Purvamimamsa, which was originally expounded by Jaimini in his Jaiminiya Sutras, which were again elaborately explained and expounded by two great Purvamimamsa scholars. One was Kumarila Bhatta and the other one was Prabhakara, and they were followed by many others like Mantana and others. So Bhashyakara is making one statement. You are reading these scriptures like Vedas, etc. And from Vedic statements you are getting information, knowledge with regard to rituals which you are ready, which you are eager to perform just for attaining material prosperity or attaining or enjoying comforts in heaven. So when you read these scriptures, when you read the Karma Kanda of the Vedas, or when you read Jaimini Sutras, then you come to know of what all yajnas, yagas, adhiratra, vajapeya, shmeta, aptorama, all these rituals that you want to perform. Because you read those scriptures from Karma Kanda literature, Karma Kanda portion of the Vedas, you learn about what all rituals you have to perform. and then very respectfully you understand it, you think over that, and you perform the rituals according to the instruction of these scriptures. The same scriptures are talking about liberation. The same Vedic scriptures are talking about Atma Vidya, about Brahma Vidya, about the non-dualistic experience, aparokshanubhuti. So why are you unwilling to accept the Vedic injunctions, Vedic statements about higher spiritual knowledge, about Atma Vidya? At the same time, you are willing to accept statements related to these external rituals, related to yajna, yaga, etc. So that's the question that Bhashyam is asking. So Bhashyam says, these Mimamsakas, who will tell you that such an Advaita Jnanam is not possible as an experience, you cannot experience it, it is only a concept or an idea. Na kasidi jnanam utpadyate. That means no one can really experience it. The experience doesn't come to anyone. These false thinkers who argue that this Advaita Jnanam doesn't come to anyone, they should be asked this question. What's the question? You are talking about rituals and you are getting knowledge about rituals from the Karma Kanda of the Vedas. The Jnana Kanda of the Vedas are discussing the highest Atma Vidya, the knowledge of Brahman. So you are willing to accept one part of the Vedas and you are not willing to accept the other part of the Vedas. How does it fit in? So he says, Yathacha Shastrobhadesh Samarthyad Dharmasthita Vijnanam Kartuscha Dekhandra Sambandhi Jnanam Cha Utpadyate. So they should be asked this question. What's the question? You come to know about dharma, and you come to know about the performance of rituals, and you also come to know about life after death. All these you come to know. Tatha shastra tasyeva atmanaha avikriyatva akartrutva egatva adivijnana kasmat na utpadyate iti prashtavyaha. So these Mimamsakas should be asked this question. Somebody should ask them this question. If you can learn about dharma, if you can learn about rituals, if you can learn about these external ceremonies from Shastra, from Vedas, then why don't you accept the teachings of the same Veda, the later part of the Veda, that is Jnana Kanda of the Vedas, about Atma Jnanam? If you are willing to accept, if you are willing to learn about dharma and rituals from Vedas, then you should also be willing to accept the description of Atman, which is immutable, which is one without a second, and which is akarta, which is abhokta. Same information, the same knowledge about Atman comes from the same Vedas. So why do you accept one and reject the other? So it is certainly not logical. Now you may ask, perhaps you may give another reason for not accepting teachings about Atma Vidya, at the same time accepting teachings and ideas about dharma. You may give another reason, that the reason is karana agojaratva idi ched. Suppose you are going to give another reason for not accepting Vedanta, not accepting knowledge about Brahma Vidya from the Vedas, saying that, well, it cannot be understood by the senses. See, rituals are taught by the Karma Kanda, and it is something that you can do involving your mind and Jnanendriyas and Karmendriyas. They are empirical things. But what about this Atma Vidya? You cannot really understand it. It cannot be reached by the senses. the senses and mind cannot directly understand. It cannot be understood through pratyaksha pramana. It cannot be even understood through mere anumana. So we are not willing to accept Atma Vidya. This is a possible objection, another additional objection that the Purva Mimamsakas are likely to put forward. So, anticipating such a possible objection, Bhashyakara says, Karana agojaratva didiched. No, then also your argument doesn't hold good, because manasaivan drashtavyam idi srutehe is a Brihadaranyaka Shruti, 4th chapter, that is a 19th mantra. So Brihadaranyaka has got a number of statements, Brihadaranyaka, Kathopanishad. Many of these Upanishads have got all such statements. This is, this Atman can be perceived manasaivanudrashtavyam, only by mind. So, a mind that is ready, a mind which is purified, a mind which has become refined, a person who has reached Chitta Shuddhi, purity of mind, through the practice of Nishkama Karma, through the practice of Karma Yoga, such a person can understand, experience this Atma, can have Atma Anubhuti. That's why Manasayvana Drashtavyam idi Sutehim. Shastra Acharya Upadesha Shamadamadi Samskritam Manaha Atma Darshane Karanam is a very, very famous statement in the Bhashyam. Shastra Acharya Upadesha Shamadamadi Samskritam Manaha Atma Darshane Karanam. When mind is purified by following scriptural injunctions, through the practice of Nishkama Karma, through the practice of Shamadama, through the practice of Nitya Nitya Vastu Viveka, etc., and also reinforced by the teachings of Acharyas, teachers who have understood the Shastra properly and also have some experience, real experience, then that mind will be able to realize this truth. That mind becomes an instrument, it becomes a karana for the perception of Atman, for understanding Atman. The ordinary mind is full of vrittis, vasanas, samskaras, sankalpas and so on. Some of them are good, some of them are not good. That's why when we try to meditate, conflicting thought currents will emerge in the mind. Some thought currents, vrittis, vasanas, samskaras, etc., are helpful, friendly, and some of them are hostile. That's why we feel inner conflict. When we try to read a holy book, when we try to meditate, when we try to pray, even when we try to listen to a talk on spiritual topics, sometimes the mind may not fully cooperate. There could be a conflict between mind and intellect. We are mostly living at a mental level, ordinary people who are not highly evolved in spiritual life. Very often they are not able to do what they actually want to do or what they really decide to do. Even if you try your best, you are able to do only what your mind eventually permits you to do. So mind should be made ready. Then that mind becomes an instrument for realization of the Supreme Self, for realization of Atman. So, and not only that, the mind will certainly be purified through Sravana, reading scriptures, Manana, contemplating the meaning of scriptural statements, and by following the guidance of great Acharyas. Then the mind becomes a friend, mind becomes a guide, mind becomes a philosopher, mind becomes our own Guru, as Sri Ramakrishna says. At the highest level, mind fully cooperates with you when you try to live spiritual life, because your mind has become pure. The mind has become a fit instrument for aparokshanubhuti. Such a mind is here referred to manasaiva anudrashtavyam. It is the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, and it comes in the 4th chapter. There are similar statements elsewhere. Manase Vedam Aptavyam in the Kathopanishad, the 4th chapter. This is to be reached, attained through mind. Drishyadetu agraya buddhya sukshmaya sukshmadarshibhihi. So agraya buddhya, buddhi here means mind. A mind which has become pure, one-pointed, concentrated and subtle. That mind becomes an instrument for the highest spiritual experience. Otherwise, mind will not be helpful. Naisha tarkena matirapaneya, Kathopanishad also says, without focusing on attaining mental purity through spiritual practices, nishkama karma, prayer, meditation, scriptural study and following the instructions of acharyas. Without that, with our raw mind, with unrefined mind, if we try to understand scriptural truths with the help of empirical logic, then it is not possible. So Kathopanishad says, Naisha tarkena matirapaneya. Again, Nayamatma pravachanena lebhyo na medhaya na bahuna sutena. So an unrefined mind, it may be very sharp, it may be sharpened by empirical logic, but not pure. Such a mind will not be able to understand this highest spiritual truth of Atmanubhuti through mere scholarship or logical analysis. That's an interesting point, remember. So, but one very important point that is made is here. Shastra Acharya Upadesha Shama Damadi Samskritam Manaha. So there are two important aspects here. First, our mind should be ready, mind should be refined, and mind should be willing to understand, mind should be a proper instrument. The other important aspect is that we need the instruction of an acharya. Now, acharya's instruction is very important here. Of course, the best example is found in the 6th chapter of Chandogya Upanishad. So you find this instruction here. How Acharya Upadesha is important. In the Chandogya Upanishad 6th chapter, there are 16 Brahmanas. It's a dialogue between Uddalaka and Shetaketu. And from 8th Brahmana to 16th Brahmana, there is an elaborate discussion of the Tattwamasi. In the 14th Brahmana of the 6th chapter, same chapter, there is an interesting illustration which brings out the relevance and importance of a teacher in spiritual life. So, on our part, we should work hard to attain mental purity, chitta shuddhi, and again we should also get help from an ideal teacher. So there is an interesting illustration. It is called Gandhara Purusha Drishtanta in the 14th Brahmana of Chandogya Upanishad 6th chapter. So a pilgrim who was going away from India back to Kandahar, it's called Gandhara, that is hometown, was walking through dense forest, was walking through a narrow road, and he was ambushed and robbed by a group of robbers. He was blindfolded and was deprived of all his possessions. He was dragged into a thick forest and tied to a tree, fully blindfolded, and the robbers went their way. So in this story, the forest represents the human body, and the robbers, the blindfold, all these unfortunate events are related to life in this samsara, in this world. So we are left in a forest. First we must develop a kind of inner discontent, dissatisfaction with this world in which we are living. Through sadhana sadushtaya, nitya nitya vastu viveka, ihamutra phalabhoga viraga, samadhi sarka sampatti mumukshuttu. Discerning mind between real and unreal, renunciation, then mental control, self-control, sense control, and liberation. A strong desire for liberation, spiritual enlightenment and liberation. These are the four qualities. If you have these four qualities, we will certainly get help from somebody. So when this poor pilgrim was tied to a tree, fully blindfolded, left in the thick forests, left alone, he had to make a lot of noise. He started crying and screaming. So listening to this sound coming from the thick forest, some compassionate traveler who was taking the same road came to him, listening to his cries, and removed the blindfold, brought him to the main road, and gave him direction. You take this road, you can get back to your hometown, Gandhara Desha. This is an example. So the teacher is compassionate, but in order to attract the attention of the teacher, in order to attract the attention of the traveler, the pilgrim who was robbed and ambushed by the robbers and tied to a tree should make some noise. So in our life we should develop a kind of inner divine dissatisfaction, discontent, a kind of detachment. We should be able to think of higher values in life. We should attain a degree of dissatisfaction, discontent with the empirical fleeting pleasures of this world. So that's the first step. That will help us to practice niskama karma, and that means performance of our duties and responsibilities without any selfish motive, self-control, purity of mind, and that will take us gradually to our spiritual goal. So that's the idea behind. So in the commentaries, Shankaracharya makes a very there are some interesting observations while explaining this. He takes the example of the description of a teacher in the Mandukya Karika Upanishad. Bhashyam has a very wonderful presentation of the role of the teacher and how it actually works in our life. So in the Mandukya Upanishad, Mandukya Karika, there is a well-known verse, Anadi Maya Supto Yada Jiva Prabuddhide Ajam Anidram Aswapnam Advaitam Buddhide Tada. We are all now deep asleep, kind of spiritual slumber. When we are happy with this world, when we are happy with the money, status, all the empirical pleasures, it is a state of spiritual sleep, spiritual slumber, spiritual ignorance. So how do we get up? How do we wake up from this sleep? When a teacher comes and wakes you up, you wake up. And when you wake up, you understand that you are not the sleeping person. So when we get out of the spiritual sleep, we are able to look at our life and ourselves from a different perspective. We realize that we are something other than this body-mind complex. This body which comes and goes, which is born, lives for many years, many decades, and then falls sick and dies and reborn. According to Vedanta, Yoga and other traditions, they believe in the law of reincarnation, the doctrine of reincarnation and the law of karma. So then we realize, well, I am not just this physical body or mind or intellect. I am something transcendental, something spiritual. So when we realize a spiritual identity, then we get up from the spiritual sleep. And this happens when an acharya comes to the scene. That's why Bhashyakara says, Shastra Acharyopodesha Samadhamadi Samskritam Manaka. So our mind should be refined, enriched by studying spiritual literature, spiritual ideas, spiritual scriptures, and then it should be purified by the upadesha, by the instruction of a teacher. So then what happens? Then we wake up from this sleep. So how do we wake up? How we get out of this slumber? The picture is given by Shankaracharya. It's a very graphic description of how we experience the spiritual awakening in the Mandukya Bhashyam. Yoyam samsari jivaka saha ubhayalakshanena tattva pradibodharupena bijatmana anyatha grahana lakshanena cha anadhigala pravrttena maya lakshanena swapena mama ayam pida putroyam napta kshetram griham pashava ahamesham swami sukhi dukhi kshatriyokam anena vardhidaschanena ityeva pragaran स्वप्नान स्थानद्वये अपि पश्यन् सुप्तः यदा वेदान्तार्थ तत्व अभिज्ञेन परमकारुणिकेन गुरुणा नानेवं त्वं हेतुपदात्मकः किन्तु तत्त्वमसि इति प्रतिबोध्यमानः तदैवं प्रतिबुध्यते कथं न अस्मिन् बाह्यमाभ्यन्तरं वा जन्मादिभावविकारोऽस्ति अद अजं स बाह्याभ्यन्तरो ह्यज इति श्रुतेः सर्वभावविकारवर्जितमित्यर्थः यस्मात् जन्मादिकारणभूतं नास्मिन् अविद्या तमो बीजं निद्रा विद्यते इति अनिद्रं हि तत्तुरीयम् अतएव अस्वप्नं तन्निमित्तत्वात् अन्यथा ग्रहणस्य यस्माच्च अनिद्रम् अस्वप्नं तस्मात् अजम् अद्वैतं तुरीयमात्मानं बुध्यते तदा. So the spiritual sleep has been going on for eternity. So so long as we are not aware of our true nature, so long as we are under the wrong notion, we are just these physical bodies, which come and go, which fall sick and dies and disappears and is reborn. This mind which is happy now and happy next moment. This buddhi, this intellect is sometimes confused, sometimes not confused, subject to changes. I am something other than all this, beyond all this. If we do not realize this truth, then what do we think of ourselves? How do we interpret ourselves? I am the son of this person, the father of this person, I am this money, this wealth, this is my job, and so on in modern context, of course. But when we experience the spiritual awakening, it's almost like suddenly opening your eyes and you find that you are totally different. You have been totally different from what you thought you were during your dream. So, a very wonderful description in the Mandukya Bhashya. I will try to explain this in English. So, this jiva, this individual soul, before he or she meets an acharya, before going through this process of refining the mind, chitta shuddhi, before practicing shamadhamadi, all this self-control, self-restraint, etc., this jiva, this individual soul was in samsara, was living in the world and of the world, asleep under the influence of Maya. And this Maya has been working for eternity. And it has got these characteristics of non-apprehension and misapprehension. Either not understanding anything at all or understanding something for something else. Agrahana and anyatha grahana. because it is the nature of misapprehension. And then, so long as we are asleep spiritually, so long as we are in a state of spiritual slumber, we think this is my father, this is my son, and this is my grandson, this is my plot, this is my land, and these are my cattle, and I am their master, I am now happy, I am now unhappy, and so on. Because we interpret ourselves as these body-mind complexes, so long as we are in a state of spiritual slumber. But then what happens? When a gracious teacher, a spiritual teacher approaches you, and the teacher is well versed in Vedanta scriptures, and is a man of experience, is an experienced person, man or woman, who has spiritual experience, that teacher comes to you and tells you, well, you are not just this physical body, this body-mind complex, which is happy now and happy next moment, which is subject to changes, which is always going through a flux or different changing stages of life. You are actually something different. You are the Atman Tattwamasi. You are that all-pervading, immanent, transcendental, spiritual reality. You are the Atman. Once you realize this, what happens is you spiritually wake up. And once we wake up, then we understand our true nature, our true dimension. So that's the importance of this important mantra. Shastra Acharya Upadesha Shama Dhamadi Samskritam Manaka. Shama and Dhamma are also equally important. So Shastram, Acharya Upadesha, Shama and Dhamma. These are four important ingredients for mental purification. Right now our mind is wavering. You cannot understand even the intellectually. An impure mind or intellect cannot get the correct meaning of even holy scriptures. Because when we read a scripture, we understand only what our mind is ready or fit to understand. So unless the mind is ready, through prayer, meditation, and through listening to the teachings of scriptures, teachers, spiritual acharyas, he cannot become fit for even intellectually understanding or getting the correct meaning of scriptural statements. Then the next two important qualifications, Shama and Dhamma, which according to Shankaracharya, Sadaiva Vasana Tyagaha, Samoyamiti Sabditaha, Nigraho Bahivrittinam Dhamma Itya Vidiyade. So it is a famous statement in the Aparokshanubhuti. Shankaracharya explains this. What is Shama, what is Dhamma is explained here. So, abandonment, Vasana Tyaga. So, abandonment of all vasanas. Vasanas are the subtle residual effects of our karmas, vasana, vrittis, samskaras, etc. As I mentioned, whatever we do, whatever we have done in the past, those actions will leave behind a residual element called vritti. These vrittis, when they become solid, reinforced, accumulated, they become vasanas, tendencies. Vasanas can always direct our mind either towards good or bad actions. So, it is important for one to give up all accumulated tendencies. Most of the tendencies may not be helpful for spiritual life. The Sadaiva Vasana Tyagaha, Samoyamidi Sabdidaka. So Shama is abandonment of all previous karma phalas, desires. At all times we must try to remain unaffected by our accumulated samskaras, vasanas, vrittis and so on. And Nigraho Bahi Vrittinam Davaitya Vidhiyate. What is Dhamma? Restraint. So it is the restrainment of all external functions of the organs. That is Dhamma. Means dissociating the mind from accumulated samskaras and vasanas, and practicing restrainment of all the functions of all organs. That means the jnanendriyas, karmendriyas, mind, all should be subject to kind of restraint, self-imposed restraint. It is called dhamma. Without the practice of this shama and dhamma and shastrobadesha and nishkama karma, it is not possible for anyone to make his mind ready for spiritual practice. It's an interesting point, remember. The Bhashyakara continues, Tathacha tat adhigamaya anumane agame cha sati jnanam na upapadyade iti sahasam edat. So, that means, and not only that, to understand the spiritual truth, to realize the spiritual truth, you have got this Shastra as a pramana, and also Anumana is there, and also Agama, scriptural studies, verbal testimony. So you can use inference. When the mind is purified, then when you do inference is one of the pramanas, one of the tools, epistemological tools for Vedanta, Pratyaksha, Anumana, Upamana, Sabda, Arthavati, Anupalabdhi. So Vedantins, Advaita Vedantins especially accept 6 pramanas. So that's an important point, remember. That is Pratyaksha, Anumana, Upamana, Shabda, Arthapatti, Anupalabdhi. Direct perception, inference, comparison, verbal testimony, that is scriptural testimony, presumption, and Anupalabdhi, absence. So these are the 6 pramanas acceptable to Vedantins. So Bhashyakara says you can study the scriptures which contain the records of the experiences of great spiritual masters, spiritual preceptors, and also you can use Anumana inference. All these are tools for understanding this spiritual truth. And still, if you say that this Vedanta or this spiritual experience cannot really come, it is only a concept. If these false thinkers, Pandita Manyamanaha, if they make such statements, it is totally unacceptable, it is Sahasam, it is timid. That's what he says. So Bhashyakara says, so remember this again a reference to an earlier statement made by Purvapakshins. Purvapakshins statement was this, is referring to a Pandita Manya, I mean the so-called philosophers, ill-informed or uninformed scholars. The statement they make, Kriya Rahidaha Avikriya Akarta Eka Aham Atma Idi Na Kasidi Jnanam Utpadyade. Yes means Sadi Sarva Karma Sannyasa Upadishyate. This is the view of some false so-called thinkers who have not understood the true meaning of scriptures and who have not had any experience. So, and they make this statement that this knowledge cannot come to anyone. It is only a concept. So Bhashyakara says, when you have in front of you scriptural statements, when you have in front of you Shastra statements, and you can also make use of Anumana, inference, in spite of all these available tools to understand the highest spiritual truth, still if you say that it cannot really happen, it cannot be experienced by anybody, it is totally a case of temerity, totally unacceptable. Jnanam cha utpadyamanam tad viparidam ajnanam avasyam badhide idi abhyugantavyam. And another point you have to admit, that is, when knowledge comes, that knowledge here means experience, aparokshanubhuti comes, then its opposite, ignorance, will certainly disappear. So when you get this knowledge, here by jnanam, the Bhashyakara does not mean mere Shastra jnana, not scripture knowledge, but what he means is the real experience of scriptural statements. That's what it means. When that experience comes, when real Vidya or Jnanam comes, if something disappears, then what disappears should be ignorance. If something disappears when light comes, then that disappearing entity should be darkness, because both cannot coexist. Tatya ajnanam darshidam khanta aham khata asmi iti ubhautau navijanitaha idi atra cha atmano hanana kriyayaha kartruttum karmattum hedukartruttum cha ajnanakrutam darshidam. So Bhashyam says these two important statements are there. That is kartruttum, hedukartruttum, karmattum. So the nature of that ajnanam as being explained. What is the nature of ajnanam? What is the characteristic of ajnanam? Ubhau tau navijanitu ya enam veti gandharam yaschainam mannide tatam ubhau tau navijanitu nayam hanti na hanyate. So the one who thinks, well, I am the actor, or I am the enjoyer of the result of action. Both these people do not know that. That's the idea behind. So here, idi atra cha atmana hanana kriyaha kartruttam karmattam hedu kartruttam cha ajnana krutam darshidam. So kartruttam, karmattam and hedu kartruttam, all these are related to ajnana. No one who understands the true nature will think of himself as karta, karma or hedukarta. That's the idea behind. Tacha sarva kriyasu abhi samanam kartrutvadehi avidya krutatvam avikriyatvat atmanaha vikriyavan hi karta atmanaha karma bhudam anyam prayojedi kuru iti. So we will continue this discussion, and before that, of course, there is one important point to be discussed. That is, these statements are important. We are continuing the discussion now. Now the Purvapakshi continues his argument about this statement. He continues argument. So one important point to remember is, the main point remember is, Bhashyam says a jnani will not have karmattum, kartruttum or hedukartruttum. All these are denied in jnani, because harana kriya kartruttum and karmattum both are ajnanas, both are related to ajnana. Therefore a real jnani will not consider himself to be prompting somebody to do something. So no hedu kartrutvam. He is not karta and he is not karma. He is not he doesn't enjoy the result of karma, and he cannot be prompting somebody to do something. So na ubhautau na vijanido nayam kanti na hanyate. So now here Bhashyam says, the Purvapakshi may ask a question like this: Nanu manasa iti vachanat na vachiganam kaiganam cha sannyasi iti ched. So that's again a discussion related to the verse Sarva karmani manasa sannyasyaaste sukham vasi navadware pure dehi naiva kurvan nakaren. We already discussed this earlier. So it comes in the 5th chapter, 13th verse. It's a very interesting discussion between Purvamimamsakas and Advaitin, centering around this particular verse. The meaning of the verse is this: a jnani, a man of realization, a person of realization, he sits totally unattached in spite of the different activities going on. His indriyas are involved in different actions, and his buddhi, mind are all engaged in different actions. But he remains vashi. That means he is totally in a sense of freedom, detachment. So this is the simple verse from 5th chapter. Now Mimamsaka is asking one interesting question. Nanu manasa iti vajanat na vachiganam kayiganam cha sannyasa iti ched. Okay, so you are talking about giving up all karma, sarva karma sannyasa. Now let us look at this verse. Sarva karmani manasa sannyasyaaste sukham vasi. Sarva karmani manasa sannasya. So manasa is a word here, mentally. So the Mimamsaka says, Lord Krishna doesn't want you to give up all srauda smarta karmas physically, at a physical level. Mentally you give up. That means you should continue the performance of yajnas, yagas, all the Vedic rituals. You have no right to give up other activities. So you should continue all rituals. Mentally you give up everything. Physically you need not give up. So that means just manasika sannyasa, mental renunciation, is the only implication of this verse. This verse doesn't say that a jnani should practice sarva karma sannyasa. This verse doesn't say that a jnani should give up all srauda smarta rituals with a definite motive. Only mentally you give up. Physically you should continue all rituals. This is the Purvamimamsa, the objector's view. Bhashyakara refused this view. He says, Na sarva karmani di visheshidatvat. So sarva karmani is meant. Sarva karmani means all karmas. Gita sloka doesn't say that that you should give up only physical karmas. He says sarva karmani says. It means Manasigam, Kayigam, Vachigam, Vaidikam, Laukikam, Sraudam, Smartam, Sharirikam. All karma should be given up. It means you transcend all these karmas. What it in actual practice means is, a jnani, one who has reached Advaitic realization, he transcends all these karmas. He goes beyond all these karmas. Vedic injunctions related to these karmas, rituals, have absolutely no binding for him. He is not obliged to perform any of these karmas. That's Bhashyakara's answer. Na sarva karmani di visheshitatva. Bhashyakara says, Lord Krishna clearly states, sarva karmani manasa sannasyaste sukham vasi. Here Purvapakshi is a person, man of great tenacity. He says, Manasanam eva sarva karmanam iti chet. All mental action you should be given up. All mental actions, that means all physical actions you should continue. The Purvamimamsakas cannot bear the idea of physically giving up all rituals. Because as I mentioned earlier, at that time, the Purvamimamsakas had saved the Vedas in their arguments against Buddhist philosophers by asserting that the central theme of Vedic literature, Vedic philosophy, Vedic way of life was the performance of yajnas and yagas as the dharma. So somehow the Mimamsaka wants to hold fast to his idea of ritualism. So manasa iti visheshanat manaseshu karmasu shabda sarva shabda sankuchitam sya iti Purvapakshinaha Shanka. Purvapakshi says, here sarva shabda is used here, sarva karmani manasa. So it means the sarva applies only to mind. So sarvesham manasanam karmanam sannyasa. In that they want to limit the meaning of sarva to mind. So manasa iti visheshanat manaseshu karmasu sarva shabda sankuchitasya iti Purvapakshinaha Shanka. Purvapakshi's doubt is this, or that his argument is that the sarva shabda applies only to mind, because sarva karmani manasa sannyasyaaste sukham vasi. He is trying to put his own ideas on Lord Krishna's mouth. Sarva karmani manasa, that's Bhagavad, that is Lord Krishna's statement. So Guru Bhakti says that the implication is you should give up all manasika karmas. You have no right to give up sharirika vajika karmas. Sharirika vajika karma should continue. That means all the rituals involving chanting or a performance of yajnas, yagas, adhiratras, vachapeya, agnishtoma, all these should continue. Only manasika actions you can give up. That's the meaning of the statement. This is the Purva-Bakshin's view. This is the view of objector, the objection. The Bhashyakara says, and he puts forward a psychological axiom, a truth. He says, now, mano vyapara purvagatvad vak kaya vyaparana mano vyapara abhave tat anubhavattehe. Mano vyapara tyage vyaparantarana anubhavattehe. Bhashyakara says is, see, when you do something physically or verbally, first the idea of action, ritual comes to your mind. So, mano vyapara purvatvad va kaya vyaparanam. So, all kayiga, manasi, all kayiga, vachika vyapara, all physical or verbal actions will follow some kind of sankalpa, meditation, some mental activity. In your mind, you think and decide, I shall do this. And then the action follows. So without a previous mental activity in the form of sankalpa, you will not engage in physical activity. So Bhashyakara says, he gives a very logical, psychological reply to Purvamimamsakas. Purvamimamsakas said, you need not give up yajnas and yagas which are sharirika karmas, which are vajika karmas, chanting, reciting the Vedas and performance of rituals, all that. That you should continue. Lord Krishna never said that you should give up. What he says is, all manasika actions, mental actions, you should give up. Bhashyakara says, without mental action, there cannot be any physical action. First, you should do sankalpa with your mind. And after you do sankalpa, then only physical actions, yajnas and yagas, all these follow. So, mano vyapara bhave tat anubhavattehe, meaning mano vyapara tyage vyaparantaranam anubhavattihi. If a person stops all mental activity, then he will not be able to do any work at a physical level or any verbal level. Every activity is a result of some kind of mental activity in the form of sankalpa. So Bhashyakara says, he gives answer to the Purvamimamsakas. Your assertion, your view or your argument that Lord Krishna is not talking about giving up sharirika, vajika karmas, he is only talking about giving up manasya karmas. That argument of yours is totally unacceptable. So far we have been discussing a very interesting part of this Bhashya. The main point is that Bhashyakara says, Kartrutvam, Karmatvam and Hedu Kartrutvam. That is Karayan, Naiva Kurvan, Na Karayan. That is related to Hedu Kartrutvam. Kurvan is Kartrutvam and Hedu Kartrutvam is Karayan. Naiva Kurvan, Na Karayan. So Bhashyakara says, Kartrutvam, that is agentship of action. Karmatvam, agentship of enjoying the result of action. And Hedu Kartrutvam, prompting the actor to do some activity, some work. All these functions are denied in Jnani. Jnani transcends all these roles. Jnani remains unaffected by any of these activities. as a witness, as a subject. So we will continue the discussion in the next session. Here, this particular part of the discussion is coming to an end. In the next session, we'll continue the same argument. In fact, the argument between Purvapakshins, Mimamsakas and Adi Shankaracharya will continue for some time. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.